Hey folks, this is Dr. Jemar Tisby, co-host of Pass the Mic, and what you're about to hear comes from 10 years ago. This is all the way back when we were called the Reformed African American Network before we changed our name to The Witness, a Black Christian collective. It is also the first appearance of Michelle Higgins, and we are talking about Ferguson. She's coming straight from a protest there. You hear it in her voice. It's also, I believe, the second appearance of Tyler Burns, our current co-host, who's been on the mic for many, many years now, but this is early on. So what you're about to hear is literally a piece of history. It is a flashback to a very tense time in our nation, and these are our thoughts there. And on the 10-year anniversary of the killing of Mike Brown, we thought it would be good to bring this episode back and hear what we were thinking then, as well as how far we've come or not. So enjoy this episode of Pass the Mic.
Dynamic voices for a diverse church. This is Pass the Mic.
Welcome to Pass the Mic. This is Jemar Tisby, and today we are discussing the ongoing situation in Ferguson, Missouri. We're doing a live show today, so we're glad all of you who joined us right now. We have two guests today. One is Tyler Burns. He's been on the show before. Tyler is a youth minister in Pensacola, Florida. He's written some for RAN and always provides helpful insight and commentary on lots of issues. We've also got Michelle Higgins. She's a first-time guest to the show, but we're excited to have Michelle because she has been in Ferguson, Missouri. She's based in St. Louis. She has been spending the past several days in Ferguson, so she'll give us a first-hand account of what's going on there. Michelle is also director of worship and outreach at a church in St. Louis called South City Church. Tyler, Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Michelle, I wanted to start with you. Since you've been there live, tell us about the situation that you've experienced, and specifically, how has media kept up with things, where it's accurate, where it may be inaccurate. Tell us what it's like, firsthand eyewitness account.
Yeah, it's definitely, there are tensions that can't be ignored no matter what part of the day it is. So generally, we've all heard the stories of calm in the daytime from the hours of 5 to 6 in the morning till about 8 to 9 o'clock at night. And then tensions rising and mounting into basically standoffs. Yesterday was probably one of the more tense of the past few days. And certainly there was less violence and less tear gas and all of that in the early evening. But the tensions mounted when we began to see three lines. There were police, there were community leaders, and there were the protesters. And there was this awkward standoff, someone waiting for someone to make the first move. And I feel like that could define most of what's going on in Ferguson. Everyone's waiting for someone to make the first move, whether it's for justice, whether it's to increase or get out of control with the rioters and the looters. But what I really have experienced overall is that from the height of the insanity of looting and rioting down to even today, people are serious about peaceful protest. The majority of folks, overwhelming majority, is serious about peaceful protest. And the militarized police presence is the intimidation that taunts factor. Them into more fresh concern that the situation won't be resolved.
How well have major media outlets kept up with things? I don't know if you've been keeping up with the news reports, but
yeah, good question.
How accurate is the information we're getting? How up to date?
The television media, and obviously I want to do a disclaimer. This is all my opinion. I am part of a pastoral fellowship that is working in Ferguson, but at the same time, here's what I've seen, here's what I've observed, right? So let's get that out there. I don't enjoy what television has done. CNN has some good stuff. MSNBC sometimes has some good stuff. But you're going to look at Fox and then local affiliates, Fox, NBC, CBS, all of their local affiliates are really trying to hit a quota. So they are concentrating on the mass insanity and calling it chaos when really, New York Times and also NPR's Code Switch blog. And they have a two-way blog. NPR has a blog called Two Way. Both of those I have enjoyed, and I've actually gotten a chance to chit-chat with a lot of reporters who are serious about telling the truth. And sadly, I wouldn't trust TV. I know it's the place to go to get those visuals, but sometimes we have to let go of the visuals that sensationalize things that are blowing the situation out of proportion and concentrate on justice and on unity and on really reconciling authorities with the people they're supposed to protect.
Thank you so much, and feel free to continue to give us throughout the conversation just your insights from actually being there. I wanted to bring up just some general questions that most everybody who's aware of this situation are asking. I was especially intrigued by a post that the hip hop artist Lecrae put out. It was probably yesterday. He put out a list of questions that he keeps hearing. And the first question on there, and I want us to talk about this, the first question on there is, why are Black people so upset?
First of all, Michelle, thank you so much for giving us that account and just being on the ground. That's really awesome to hear. I'll say I don't want to presume to universally know why everyone is upset, because we're not all monolithic, we're not all the same.
Yeah.
And so I've seen even amongst us in our ethnic group, us have different views and viewpoints of what's going on. But I think the general consensus is that a large majority of Black Americans believe that in our current system, while it may seem completely unbelievable to some to say this, that in our current system and since the inception of this country, Black life has been valued less than white life. And so whether or not that's the reality intentionally, unintentionally, statistics and laws and obviously unspoken rules, separate but equal, however you want to put it, has led to a sense of disenfranchisement, that the Black experience is not authentically the American experience, and that it's actually a sub-level of that, and it's less valuable than everything else. So I think that's the general gist. And then I guess we can also talk about the fact that a lot of us have experienced what we would consider unfairly being, and I don't even want to use the stereotypical word, but being unfairly singled out by law enforcement for appearing to be menacing. And so I think all this kind of led to a perfect storm. And then also the things that are going on in Ferguson as well, with their racial tensions that already existed long before this. I think this was kind of the flashpoint that created the drama.
Michelle, what are your thoughts on this? Why are folks so upset? And I would add, it's not just Black people or African Americans, but why the outrage over this incident? In case you're not thoroughly familiar with the case, it was Saturday, not about a week and a half ago, when Mike Brown, an 18-year-old African American, was shot and killed by a white police officer. The ensuing events from that have included peaceful protests. Sometimes a very small minority, like you said, Michelle, they were involved in some looting and some illegal activities. But the response from the Ferguson Police Department was they came out fully arrayed in riot gear, shields, guns, tear gas, all of those things. So just in case you're not familiar, and there are always new developments. But Michelle, from being there and talking to people, what are folks expressing that they're upset about?
The greatest anger issue right now is care for the community, which definitely speaks directly to Tyler's point. First of all, human dignity. And we all know what that's about, dealing with just being in a minority race, whether it's cultural, socioeconomic. There's so much to be said on that dignity piece. But when we hone in and we focus on the things that result from lack of being dignified in our own culture, we see these events that basically light fire to our hearts. And the biggest, I think the central issue that I've heard from most of the protesters and the people when I'm doing home visits is that the police don't care. And that to them is the most immediate representation.
That's the most immediate representation of all authority.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. So that's when they're looking for who speaks for us, who protects us, who do we go to ask for change or even to promote unity. You have to have authorities like police involved. Church communities are pretty strong in Ferguson, but if you want real political change, normally the police are at the front lines of that. So it's a betrayal, I think, is the biggest issue they're dealing with. There's a major betrayal that a lot of people, even as I talk to them, have said, this doesn't surprise us, but it does infuriate us. Yeah. And then there are some who are completely shocked by it, like my friends who are African immigrants who thought, well, in the United States, surely these things don't happen. And here they are experiencing something that makes them, harkens them back to some of the civil atrocities that occurred in their countries.
You're touching, Michelle, on some of the things that I'm thinking about as far as why many African Americans and others are so upset by this, is because this particular event is not an isolated occurrence. Tyler mentioned before that if you look statistically, there seems to be a disproportionate sort of focus on African Americans, particularly males, by arrests, stop and frisk, incarceration, and of course, fatal encounters with police. And so this is part of a whole context and a whole history of things that have been going on regarding African Americans and those in authority, especially those who are armed in authority, like police officers. But I think it's also, one person described it this way. He described racial issues in America like a wound that has begun to heal, and maybe it's got a scab over it, but it's not completely healed. And incidents like this are like when you accidentally scrape that scab back off and it reopens the wound. Sorry to be graphic, but I think it's somewhat like that. We think that we're beyond these kinds of incidents like your African immigrant friends are thinking. But then an event like Ferguson occurs and it reminds us we really haven't progressed as far as we've thought. And African Americans, a lot of us, are fully aware that we have much, much more progress to make. And then you get in the back and forth of, we already knew that this was a problem, and now you guys see, and then others are just surprised and taken off guard and don't understand. And I think that's, at least for me, part of my frustration here is like, this is an ongoing pattern. It reveals that we really haven't made the progress that we thought we made. And here's just another incident that this is true.
Yeah, definitely. I just want to hop in and say two quick things to kind of reinforce your point. Number one, I want to make this very clear. Not all law enforcement, nor are we blanket statement generalizing all law enforcement to say that, universally cops view black life as less than white life. We do, and we are not doing that. Like, that is not the goal. That's not the intent. And I know most people will know that, but others would say, you're not, whatever. I just want to make that clear. We're not doing that. We don't support unrest or anarchy or anything. But the second point I do want to make is that this is not an isolated incident. And when we say it's not an isolated incident, we mean within the past month, there have been 3 other similar cases nationwide. And so we're talking about these situations now that, there are always going to be those flashpoints like the Trayvon Martins or the Fergusons, but this is something that is ingrained within the fabric of our lives and in our culture. So we see it a lot more frequently. And I think, again, to make this point is important. It all depends on the vantage point of what you're looking at. So a lot of people are halo dropping into the situation and then are posting facts or articles or blogs and just spraying, and then they're going to helicopter out of it at the end. But in reality, for a lot of us, this is our lives. This is our existence. Like, we can't leave this situation, even if we're in places of affluence, even if we're in places where we have achieved, even if we're in places of education. It's a universal issue. So we're not necessarily even saying that this whole issue is just about a racial tension, but that it does have implications in how we deal with this issue. And to ignore that would be wrong, and would also be unfair to the victims and the person who's involved. So
Yeah.
I think it's important to point out that the whole idea of saying we are hurt because of what we feel is a betrayal by the police is the people of Ferguson saying they desire right relationship with law enforcement. And so definitely, to me, even as I heard them say that, my first thought was not, now we're going to go crazy on all the cops. My first thought was, wow, some of the folks that I was speaking with already had good rapport with police officers in their neighborhood. And so it was a deep wound that these friends that they normally could call, if a police officer lives a couple miles from your house and you know him, you go to the same grocery store or maybe the same church, but all of a sudden there are no answers. There's no word on what's going on and how things happened. So I think it is actually a testimony to the work that had begun in Ferguson to reconcile citizens, to really reconnect people who need protection and appreciation and those that can provide it. So you're absolutely right, Tyler. I think we need to let people know this is more of a testimony to the fact that a predominantly Black community was trying to make headway with the authorities over them, and they want it. They really do.
Yeah. One other thing that you brought up, Tyler, reminded me of this notion of being an ally, particularly when we talk about folks in the white majority. How, Tyler, do you think someone could be an ally or an advocate for the people in Ferguson or even for African Americans generally?
Man, two things I would say. I would say, number one, please, from our vantage point, do not buy into false narratives. There are some default go-to areas where whenever these types of situations arise, the media and others, automatically we all run to our home bases and we all run to places where we're starting to use the same terminology, the same language as the default response to whenever this would come up. So whenever there's a racial tension, people will say, well, what about this? Or what about that? Or why are you guys bringing this up? Or please don't buy into false narratives that we're just trying to bring this up and that's all we want to do. That is just not the case. Like, it is a situation that we cannot avoid. And I think by the sovereignty of God, we have been placed in for such a time as this. But I don't necessarily, I believe we should really just be careful of buying into false narratives. But then I think the second part is actually engaging the hard issues. And this is something that we have to face as well, right? So we have to face this in all of our spheres of influence as Christians. We have to engage difficult, hard issues and things that may make us feel very uncomfortable, things that we may not agree with, things that we may not even think have any credence. We're like, how could you believe this? It's that exact engagement that will open us up to be more sensitive to other parts of the body that we may not be familiar with. I mean, as someone as people keep bringing up to me, Christianity is not just an American idea. Like, it's not it's not something that America came up with. Just because we live in America, there are Christians all across the world who are in different situations. And as we seek to engage them as also being members of the body of Christ and fellow image bearers of God, we have to try to insert ourselves into where they are. It's kind of like the sympathy, but really empathy. We're trying to be empathetic to understand what you're doing. And I think there's a lot of Black people and Black Christians who would love to have that conversation in a way where we don't have to feel the need to check and balance ourselves at all times but that we can actually engage and find a safe place with those who may even disagree with us, but we're still in the same body. We still worship Jesus and love him just as much as they do.
That's a great point, Tyler. And Michelle, in a minute, I'm going to ask you about the pastoral fellowship and the way you've seen churches and Christians coming together over this. But I just wanted to build off what Tyler was saying. When I'm thinking of an ally, I'm thinking of, well, two things. One, a great example, the pastor and author Matt Chandler sent out a tweet yesterday that said that his blonde-haired, blue-eyed son would probably never experience the kind of police attention that other darker-skinned folks do. He was basically getting at the idea of white privilege. And if you look at the responses to that tweet, I mean, he experienced a firestorm of negative responses.
Man. He got murked.
He got murked, exactly. But that's a prime example of what it means to be an ally, because you're putting your privilege and your platform at risk for the sake of those who are marginalized and don't have as much privilege. And that is, I think, what is scary about it for all of us. We all wrestle with this in different ways, but especially in a racial conversation, that's what you risk. But when I'm talking about allyship, I'm thinking of three things. I'm thinking of awareness, empathy, and engagement. Number one, I've been somewhat surprised and honestly a little disappointed that there isn't a greater awareness on the part of some about what's even happening in Ferguson. Nor is there an awareness of its importance per se. So there may be a lot of reasons why somebody doesn't know what's going on. But then even beyond that, there's a failure to recognize why it might be important to not only African Americans, but the nation as a whole. But then I'm also looking for empathy, which is what Tyler was touching on, which is that having a safe space, especially with folks in the majority, to really be honest about the frustrations and the ongoing, because this isn't new to Black folks, and to be able to have allies where you can be honest about how you're feeling and what your experience has been without sort of the qualifiers and the judgments and whatnot. And then moving on from that.
Can I hop in one quick second? I want to ask you guys this, like, because when I posted this on Facebook, someone sent me an inbox question. And it was a really great question. He's a brother, and he said, "How do I, like, should I feel guilty that I'm hurt by this? Like, should I feel like I'm feeling like there's something wrong with me saying I'm hurt by this. This hurts me, and from a gospel perspective, I don't understand it, and I'm frustrated, and I'm upset, and there's stereotypes that we kind of try to play out of, that we're not always angry, we're not always trying to contend, and we're not always, upset. But isn't there a time for legitimate frustration? Isn't there a righteous angst that says this is not how the world should be? Can you guys speak to that?
Michelle?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, first of all, we have to understand that righteous anger actually covers every culture, every race, and all of time. And anytime something happens that has been, like you just said, Tyler, bubbling up and coming to the surface after so many years and so many situations, we have to recognize that even the narrative that us as Black folks try to convince our culture of is subordinate, brings out in us. So yeah, I don't want people to think I'm the angry Black woman. Of course not. But if I am angry about injustice, then it doesn't matter what color I am. Something set it off. And that's some Holy Ghost anger welling up in me that the Lord is going to use no matter what culture or situation I'm in. So there is no guilt in being angry when life is ripped away for no reason. There is no guilt in being frustrated with how you see brothers and sisters of any color, any culture being devalued. I really believe that we accidentally canonize what culture tells us we should be. It's this accidental miseducation for us to say, well, we are Black, so our first priority is to let people know that we're peaceful. But God didn't say that. That's not my job. a matter of fact, it is not my job to explain myself in a situation where I should be able to feel like family with myself. I don't have to convince you of my value before our Heavenly Father. My human dignity is set, and therefore my right to self-defense, I don't even need it. I don't have to defend myself. And when all of us understand our own dignity and our own value, we can immediately run to someone else's defense because we have no longing or no need to defend ourselves. I am who I am in God. And that means I can pour all of who I am into compassion, into empathy, right? I can pour all of that into a situation of pain and turmoil because I have every right to anger, because this anger is not self-centered.
And, yeah.
That was good.
That was good.
Man.
Image of God. Hey folks, Dr. Jemar Tisby here. I'm one of your co-hosts on the Pass the Mic podcast along with Tyler Burns. We've been doing this thing for 10 years now. This year's been an especially tough year if I'm honest, but we do this because of you. And the only reason we can keep doing this is also because of you. So I'm encouraging you to visit patreon.com/passthemic and become a supporter of this show. For as little as $1 an episode, you can keep us going. Visit patreon.com/passthemic. Hey folks, Dr. Jemar Tisby here, and I want to make sure that you know about the Justice Takes Sides brand. This is merchandise, this is apparel to help you represent your values. This is about getting people off the sidelines and into the struggle for justice that's ongoing today. Go visit justicetakesides.com, get your merchandise and apparel there, and follow us on Instagram at Justice Takes Sides. One of the things, though, that complicates this situation is it turns out Mike Brown was not a squeaky clean character.
Sure.
It turns out that he's involved in some illegal activity, that he may have been aggressive in some sense. We don't know all the details yet, but it's not as if he's this, friendly kid next door that people originally tried to sort of craft a narrative around that, I suppose. But does that have any bearing on what happened to this teenager? Do you think that his background and those kinds of things should come into play in terms of our response? What do you think, Tyler?
Yeah, I would say, man, personally, my stance and my passion for this has never been predicated on Mike Brown's total innocence. Like that's never been the foundation for human dignity. Like he has dignity because he's a human being. Last night I heard on CNN two black reporters who were engaging each other, and one of them said, well, we need to be careful because Mike Brown wasn't a civil rights leader. So our outrage, we just need to kind of temper it because he actually said that. He said he wasn't a civil rights leader. And the other black reporter said, yeah, he wasn't a civil rights leader, but he was a human being. He was a person, so here, and I'm glad you brought that up, Jemar, because here's the thing. The most hurtful part of this whole process for me so far has been seeing brothers who I trust and love and people who are our fellow members of the body of Christ go to extreme lengths to justify the way in which he was killed. Like the savagery of how he was killed. Like, I don't know if that's a product of our cultural desensitization to violence. Like, we're so desensitized to violence that we feel like it's okay to be Rambo in certain areas. Kind of this whole George Zimmerman idea that I'm going to go and I'm going to physically approach somebody, whether or not, again, not injecting my views or opinions on that situation. But the idea of that is hurtful to me. Like, no one deserves 6 shots. Mm-hmm. No one deserves 4 in the arm and 2 in the head. And if, again, I'm hearing it from the same people who would justify torture in a lot of cases. So they would justify torture to get information. And I'm like, guys, these are still human beings. We need to be careful how we just say, you know what, you deserved it. You had it coming. And that to me is such an anti-gospel idea. But yeah, Mike Brown was a human being just like everyone else. As someone said, he did smoke weed. He did have unsavory activities. We don't justify that and say, so what? But we do also say that didn't take away from his humanity.
That's good. That's good. Michelle, what do you say when, I don't know, have you encountered it when folks have basically said, well, Mike Brown could have been attacking the officer and there could be all kinds of reasons for him to get 6 shots. I mean, how do you respond to that, or what's been the commentary there?
Yeah, there's so many responses. My big thing, and I appreciate what you said, Tyler. So I don't want to repeat everything, but yeah, so much of what Tyler said is absolutely true. The biggest place, or the most central place where I try to go with people, is to tell them that there is an utter lack, especially if I'm speaking with Christians, there's an utter lack of humility and love when we discuss Mike Brown's activities in his life as if we have written the Lamb's Book of Life. It makes no sense for me to sit and be fully aware of all of the things that I'm doing or the people that I'm judging in my heart from day to day. To my deepest disappointment, it is the responsibility of the church, especially in the Reformed community, to teach humility, to teach sacrament as a lifestyle, not just a thing that we do in the church building. But if we understand that Christ is the only perfected and perfect sacrament, then we will understand that any other bloodshed by anyone else's hands, we have no right to judge how it went down. We have no right to say, here's what happened and here's why one person deserved it or another person didn't. We become truly equal. So equality, the equality that we are dying for, that we are screaming for, when folks that appreciate it and want it say, we got to make Mike Brown look good, they're still forgetting that equality has already cleared him of deserving death simply because he didn't deserve death.
Yeah.
When they remove that equality from the whole equation, then they themselves become the people who are throwing stones. They become the folks who have the right to say who goes and who stays. And that, to me, and what I'm saying right now is when I know that the person is a Christian, I immediately challenge them on whether or not they believe that that is actually a sacramental view, a truly theologically sound view of human life overall. And where do they fit in that equation if a popo was about to gun him down?
And let's switch gears and talk about the Christian response or responses. And by the way, if you're joining us, we are live with Tyler Burns and Michelle Higgins. Michelle has been on the ground in Ferguson for the past several days. She lives in St. Louis. Let's talk about the Christian response. Tyler, let's start with you. What have you seen, whether on the internet or even more importantly locally, has been the response of churches or pastors or groups of Christians? And then Michelle, I want to throw that same question to you, what it's been like in Ferguson. So what's the Christian response been like, Tyler?
I'll say this, man. I'm always more encouraged than discouraged. I think there's a choice there for us to focus on that which is good. What I've seen as far as the Christian response is mixed. There is definitely areas of encouragement, like you mentioned, Pastor Matt Chandler, which I think engaging that thought process and even that entire idea for him in his position to say that is very encouraging. And then there have been other situations where I have not been as encouraged. But one of the things that I think it's important for all of us to do in this situation is extend a lot of grace to each other. Because we're not in the same way that we are asking for others to see our point of view, we don't see theirs. And so the gospel allows us to freely give grace to those who we may very, very strongly disagree with and say, in the end, we can still engage each other in love. And what I see in the category that I always put it in is I don't think any of the people who I see on my timeline are trying intentionally to be prejudiced or bigoted or trying to dismiss. They just may not see. And in the same way that they may not see, I have blind spots. So my feet have clay too. So when you think about that, you're able to say, hey, I totally understand you may not see this. I would love to encourage more conversation. I would love to really talk about this with you. I'd love for us to sit down and open up the scriptures. However, I'm not going to throw a stone at you because you don't see things immediately from my point of view. Everyone is a product of their upbringing and their culture. And that's what makes the body diverse and great. But we have to also enter into each other's experiences. So I've been encouraged by some of the things that I've seen. And it's been disappointing. Here's the one part that's disappointing for me. I'll bring this up. When you post certain blogs or articles, I have been disappointed by how we have allowed other people to speak for us who do not have a redemptive worldview of the gospel. That I will say. Just because we agree politically on talking points does not mean that you actually have the heart of God and the mind of Christ in this matter. So when I've seen the stereotypical names, which I won't really get into, but I've seen the stereotypical names getting shared and posted and liked and retweeted, it hurts me because I want to ask the people, do they have the mind of Christ? Or does it fit their political narrative for them to rail against the left-wing media or to rail against liberal bias or to rail against a Democratic Party or a Republican Party, whoever it may be? I think that is very disappointing to me. And I think we have to use discernment with who we just allow to speak for us if they're not actually coming from a viewpoint of redemption in the gospel.
I love that. Yes, we need to be discerning about who we allow to speak for us. Michelle, you've been there. I just wanted to read a comment that we got on the YouTube page where this is broadcasting. It says, we're asking the question, what should be the Christian response or what could be? And he says, the response definitely shouldn't be to pretend like nothing is going on. I know of a handful of churches in the St. Louis area that seem to completely dismiss the fact that there is a broken, hurting, and angry community in their own backyard. A crisis is happening directly in front of them, yet they ignore it. It turns me off to see this response from pastors in the area. I would even appreciate at least a brief sentence about the situation rather than no response at all. I have to admit that the churches that haven't responded at all are majority white. From your experience, Michelle, being there, what has been the response of Christians, of Reformed churches, of white churches? Can you comment on that some?
Absolutely. The pastoral fellowship of which I'm a part is predominantly African American. There are 5 PCA churches, Presbyterian Church in America. 5 of those congregations represented. 3 of those congregations are pastored by African Americans. So you've got brothers, Black brothers already coming in and fellowshipping with one another and bringing, and sort of a slow burn, bringing their white friends in to the pastoral fellowship as well. So the Pentecostal churches, whether organized or non-denom and independent, they are responding in force. And the local churches are responding in force. When you look at, I wish I had a map for you guys of the Canfield area, West Florissant and Canfield, there are more storefront churches in walking distance to all the craziness than there are larger churches with, say, bigger budgets who can show up and really help out on the ground. Now, those churches, even though the closest one is, I think, 2.5 miles away, somebody on YouTube correct me, those churches are showing up. They're bringing trucks and cars full of food, good barbecue, first of all, God bless y'all. And they are showing up with water bottles, milk to help people who are suffering from the tear gas. And they are telling folks, we are your safe place. Come and talk and let it out, and we will be your safe place. There are churches around the metro area who are caring for the entire city of St. Louis. If you can't get up to Ferguson, if you have family that is concerned and needs, but you guys don't live anywhere near all the rallies and the church services happening. There are many other plans to pour into their neighborhood. And I think that is just as important. One of the things that I want to make clear is that people should have no guilt that they can't afford to jump on a plane and come out here. We can't show up like Nelly. We can't roll deep like Nelly. And I appreciate his presence. But like you said, Tyler, the media, or maybe Jemar said this, the media is going to go away and the protests probably will stop someday. And somebody will be left to lead that group of people, to lead our young people, and it has to be the church. So the church response has been overwhelming with African Americans. With my white brothers and sisters, I have actually been quite impressed. Have I been impressed by full congregational mobilization? Yeah, that's a no. Have I been impressed by the desire to reach out? By having, I got a few emails just before we went on air from white friends of mine who live probably an hour from Ferguson in West County, and you can just guess what that means. They're rolling, and they're beautiful, and
they're wonderful people.
But if they wanted to remain removed from the situation, they could. But they are choosing to seek out ways in which they can get involved. So where do I lead them? Where do I take them? First of all, I want to show them that I appreciate them and I really respect them for doing the hard thing. So yes, I fully understand that comment. And I do agree with the person who commented, predominantly white churches have not mobilized in full force, but I know that there are 4 white pastors in Ferguson right now. Hanging out with their friends and just trying to meet people. And no, their churches have not mobilized to show up in large numbers the way other churches have, but leadership is leading. And so I think what we need from these guys is some words to the public, some posts, some blogs or something to let people know that they care. So that's the silence that frustrates me.
Well, let's wrap up here. Let's do a lightning round. Final thoughts. We'll go Tyler, then Michelle, then I'll wrap us up.
Man, final thoughts. One of the questions that Lecrae brought up is that people ask him, "What's your goal in this? You know, what's your goal? What's the end game? Why are you bringing all this up?" And just in reading, I've been reading through Galatians and just seeing Galatians 3 just leap out and grab me, you know, that there's neither Jew nor Greek or slave nor free, male nor female, we're all one in Christ. And then even connecting that to 1 Corinthians 12, that when one suffers, we all suffer together. Or when one rejoices, we all rejoice together. It's that solidarity, that unity in the body that Christ desired. And that's what we're going for. I hope no one ever will assume that this is intentionally brought up for divisive purposes, and it's intentionally brought up to divide or ostracize other people or make people feel guilty even. But this is more just simply to highlight a different area that some people may have a blind spot in. And I believe that the Lord is working. When I hear Michelle talk, I'm encouraged. When I see Thizzle and Jason on the ground, I'm encouraged. Like when I see others who are taking risks in their posts, I'm encouraged. And so the Lord is still sovereign. Like that didn't change just because Mike Brown got shot. That didn't change because of slavery. That didn't change because of segregation. That never changed. He is sovereign. And so I trust his sovereignty in this situation. But what I do vow and what I do believe we should come together and agree is that we won't stop talking, is that we won't stop engaging, we won't stop having these hard conversations, because this is what Jesus would want. That's
great. Amen. Fantastic thoughts. Michelle, final thoughts.
Final thoughts. Oh, this is never going to end. I completely agree with Tyler, and I'm so blessed to meet you today, brother. We've got to keep in touch. I do want to encourage everyone who is not around, who is not in the STL metro area, to trust with us that when we are unable to post, to update, to put the word out in the way that we should, God is working, like you just said, and he is working to bring about a revolution of the heart that really can't be promoted in a way that would satisfy most of the people who want to get their news. I send out little email posts and email updates. Anyone who wants those can get in touch with me, but there are no photographs when I'm holding hands with someone and praying fervently with them about a son or a daughter who is wondering someplace. There's no way to live tweet the actual transformation of the city, of this region, because it is slow and because we have no control over it, and because first and foremost, we must live confessionally in a way that empties us of ourselves and fills us with a passion of Jesus Christ. And so I think that our culture accidentally demands from us statements and reasons that we are out there and that we deserve to be heard. But there is a lot to be said for those who are actually pursuing the voiceless. And this is during the protests, but also in the homes of people who will never leave their house while the protests are happening. There are thousands of people that we'll never see on the news, who will never be tear gassed, but their hearts are flooded with anguish and with pain. So there are many people on the ground seeking out those people. And that is some serious work that's going on that will never be televised. So I want all of our brothers and sisters around the country to trust that God is at work. And I also want all of our brothers and sisters, especially in the St. Louis area, to pray with your feet and to pray with your mouth.
Yeah. My final thoughts. First of all, thank you, Michelle, and thank you for Tyler as well. As always, your insights are fantastic. Really appreciated you coming on the show. My final thoughts echo a lot of what you've said. Empathy is really what's needed now. I try to imagine if this was in my community, if this was happening in my neighborhood, what I would want to see happen, what I would want others to do. And I think it's important to realize this is not a black thing. This is not a race thing. This is not a Ferguson, Mississippi or Missouri thing. Not Mississippi this time. This is a human being, image of God thing. And for Christians, this is a household of faith thing. These are our brothers and sisters in the Lord. And how can we support them? And how can we foster understanding? And so be quick to listen and slow to speak and praying without ceasing. Thank you guys for coming on the show. We want to thank Michelle and Tyler. Do you have social contact info if folks want to keep up with you? How can they do that for you, Michelle?
I'm on Facebook, Michelle Higgins.
Of course, we want to thank Tyler and Michelle for joining us. Our producer for the show has been Bo York, and our guests this episode were Tyler Burns and Michelle Higgins. And I've been your host, Jemar Tisby. We'll see you soon on the next Pass the Mic.
Pass the Mic is powered by The Witness, a Black Christian collective, and hosted by Tyler Burns and Dr. Jemar Tisby. Our video editor is Ryan Gentry, and our executive producer is Bo York. We want to thank the Converge Podcast Network for providing advertising support for this podcast. If you'd like to advertise your product or services on this and other shows, be sure to visit convergepodcasts.com for more information. Don't forget to like, subscribe, review, and share this podcast. And until next time, we'll see you soon on the next Pass the Mic.